Howdy, and welcome to Post Amp. This is a weekly discussion about records from past and present, these long play pieces that we love, records that we think have impacted and achieved the music community and us personally. We love to celebrate the bold stories that surround the recording and production and even the reception of these musical masterpieces. And so we're super honored to have you with us today. We're going to talk about Led Zeppelin 1 today. I'm your host, Preston.
I'm Austin.
And I'm Grant.
Yeah, and we're super excited to be bringing Led Zeppelin's first record, Led Zeppelin 1, or Led Zeppelin by Led Zeppelin from 1969, talking about it with you today. So, yeah, welcome to our good times, bad times of our recording career.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah, I noticed in the podcast sphere there was a sheer lack of white men explaining things to people. So I said, hey, it's time for some guys just to enter in and
got to do it.
Yeah, we just have to explain some stuff to the rest of the world.
I'm glad we're addressing that directly. That's good.
Yeah. I just, there's so many podcasts. I saw a meme. It was like, hey, starting a podcast with your friends is the 2019 version of starting a band with your friends. And I just need to lean into that, honestly. So here we are.
We're really following in our subject's legacy.
That's right. That's right. Honestly. So today we are honored to be talking about one of our favorite albums. It's Led Zeppelin, or Led Zeppelin 1. Came out 51 years ago, January of 1969, at the height of a crazy cultural and political and social sphere. And man, we think that this album and record is still relevant today. And that's what we want to talk about and celebrate today. I think we need to shout out a few people. We lost a great one last week, honestly. One of our biggest musical inspirations, I would say. Neil Peart. Grant, I know you had like a special attachment to the drummer from Rush, Neil Peart. What are your thoughts on? Yeah,
man, the necromancer himself. Grew up listening to so much Rush with my dad. Holds a special place in my heart. I always thought he was one of the best. So
yeah,
left a big hole here in the world.
Yeah, you called me on Friday, and when you said, "Man, did you hear?" There was this moment where I actually thought you were talking about like a family member or something. So it's kind of crazy, but I get it. I think I do get it. Even old music, I think we can connect to and really like look up to people and creators. And anyway, we get to celebrate that today. And so, we're talking about Led Zeppelin, self-titled, released in January of 1969. In case you didn't know, Led Zeppelin is made up of a foursome of beautiful British individuals. Out front, we've got the beautiful, flowy locked Robert Plant.
Tight panted,
indeed.
For sure.
Yeah, just moving around, riding around, getting it. Jimmy Page, the lead guitarist and arguably probably the lead composer, producer, kind of brainchild. The one that was initiating a lot of the conversations.
The smoothest. Unable not to smile while playing.
Right. For sure.
And he had never picked up a guitar before they released this album. Am I incorrect there?
Mm-hmm. No, you're right, Grant. Yeah, he actually never had touched
no lessons, nothing.
Yeah. Never had touched the
Amazing.
guitar. And then John Bonham on drums, John Paul Jones holding down the bass. Yeah, so this album, do you guys have like a personal relationship or thought to like this record? When you hear, I don't know, good times, bad times kind of starting up, leading off this beautiful 44-minute piece of glory. Well, yeah, what do you think about? Where are you?
So what's fun is my first specific experience with Led Zeppelin was listening to the whole Mothership collection, which oddly enough still starts out with good times, bad times. So like the first Led Zeppelin song I really listened to was still that. But I didn't listen to this album specifically until probably 2 years ago when I got it on vinyl.
Yeah, and your like first impression or maybe like a couple words you'd say to describe, I don't know, just like what you felt about the record.
I was shocked by the very directly bluesy tracks.
Yeah, for sure.
I just didn't expect it from everything else I'd heard from them before.
For sure.
It takes me back to like circa 04.
Yeah.
My cousin made me some mix CDs.
Of course,
Good Times, Bad Times was on there along with some country tracks.
That's
like
so great.
Contemporary country.
Yeah.
Horrible mix CD.
Yeah.
However, I knew my dad grew up listening to Zeb. I was excited to be listening to him and hadn't really listened to him much. So I guess I was about 11 or 12 at the time. And
For sure. Yeah.
yeah, it was just a cool intro to them. And then I don't know. I mean, then I just started listening to them. LimeWire was huge
For sure. Middle school,
middle and high school, and so I was just pulling tracks down every day. Never got like full albums or anything, so
Right.
just tracks here and there.
Yeah, I think
Definitely part of me.
I think in East Tennessee, typically on like the cultural front, country is king. You know, you're like listening to WIVK or whatever, like riding around your car. And then one day something happens where you're exposed to classic rock or dad rock sound.
Good music.
Honestly, good music.
Yeah.
And then it opens your ears to this whole entire world.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like, and you start asking your dad about it. And for me, it was like more Southern rock, honestly. But I remember, and maybe it wasn't even Good Times, Bad Times or Led Zeppelin from this record, but I remember hearing just Jimmy Page's just raucous, in your face guitar tones and Robert Plant just yelling into a microphone. And it just awoke something inside of me where I was like, man, I need to just dig into this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just different, you know? And I don't know. I love this record. I think it's crazy, you know, released in 1969. Last year they celebrated the 50th anniversary of the beginning of Led Zeppelin's career. I think it's a really great signpost of the beginning of an incredible, prolific 10 years for a band that meant so much. I read something today. It was talking about, hey, if the Beatles were the most popular or achieving of the 60s, then we have to argue or at least make the claim that Led Zeppelin was the most achieving of the 70s, you know? And to me,
it's a tough argument, but
yeah,
it's
for
probably
sure,
them.
for sure.
Yeah.
But I do kind of see this like parallel of like influence and effect coming from, you know, this band from Britain. And in my mind, I know Austin, you and I talked about it, but they kind of sit in the middle of this folk bluesy movement of the 50s and 60s,
Mm-hmm.
and then the heavier rock metal movement of the 70s and 80s. And so I think there's a lot of genres and bands that don't exist without this record, honestly, because it kicks off a career of, you know, it spans 10 or so years or 12 years. And
if they exist, they're underground.
For sure.
You know, I mean, if
for sure.
If you know, if they went so far as to actually exist beyond this or without this, they're
for
no
sure.
one.
And one of the things I love about this whole idea and thing and conception and ideas that, you know, Keith Moon, the drummer from The Who, he had told these guys like, hey, this idea is going to go over like a Led Zeppelin, like a balloon full of metal. It's going to crash and burn. And they just leaned into it. Like, they said, all right, we'll put a burning balloon on the front of our album, and then we're going to sell millions of copies.
Fun fact.
Yeah.
The Von Zeppelin family sued them because of that.
Actually.
Yep.
Wow.
I don't think it went anywhere.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, that's what we're talking about. This is only 30 years after the Hindenburg disaster, and Led Zeppelin is just like, yeah, we'll put a burning Zeppelin on the front of our cover. Like,
it's pretty proto metal, if you will.
For sure. Or, yeah. This is like pre punk rock. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Seriously. I mean, that's a great segue to what we're talking about. I mean, Austin, do you have any half-minded or half-looked up internet facts about this record you want to share?
The most fun one was definitely the Von Zeppelin family suing them.
For sure.
Because that's just wild and crazy. I can't think of anything else. Because everything else is like actual things about the record. There wasn't that much craziness around this one.
For sure. Yeah.
As you would expect for this time period and stuff like that.
Grant, do you have any like first impressions when you like kind of went back to this album and went and listened again?
First impressions to me were just how rawly it was recorded.
Yeah.
I loved that. I mean, it was a cheap production, and it was just, hey, we're gonna record it in, you know, a short amount of time.
For sure.
And what you get is what you get. And I really dig that, you know?
Yeah.
It's something that somewhere along the way, you know, in the next 12 to 15 years was heavily mastered. You know, and this one was just, hey, here we are, we're plugged into our instruments, and
for sure,
you know,
you're
hearing what's coming out.
And yet everything is crystal clear.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you can very clearly tell Jimmy Page from John Paul Jones, from John Bonham, from Robert Plant.
Right.
Like everything comes through crystal clear, unlike if you just think about some of the earlier punk records that were just gross sounding.
Right.
And just muddy. Like that was their thing, but it just doesn't sound the same.
I agree. I totally agree. I think there's a really beautiful story that stands behind this record. This had every chance to be just a derivative. You know, we see Jimmy Page. He's coming off his Yardbirds kick. He's had like a pretty solid career, touring and recording with the famed, well received, critically and commercially band the Yardbirds. They split up, and he's like attempting to create just a Yardbirds 2.0. Like they tour in 1968 as Yardbirds 2.0 or the new Yardbirds. And there's some really great pictures and things out there and posters in Denmark and Scandinavian countries of pre Led Zeppelin touring. Even if we look back, there's Robert Plant back in the fall. He posted this beautiful picture of their like recording sheet, like their time sheet, and the thing said Yardbirds on it. It didn't even say Led Zeppelin. So they had like not fully leaned into this new band identity. It's really sweet. And I mentioned it, but there's the Yardbirds that are kind of like leading up and influencing this album. You know, it's the end of the Beatles kind of run. They're about to release their last few studio albums, and you know they've not been touring for a while. There's bands like Cream and all these kind of like blues influence, jangly psychedelic movements that are going on like in Britain and the US.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of ripe for the picking. We see this band step up. And I think what's beautiful is like it could have been so derivative, but Jimmy Page had this like crazy vision, and he got these guys together and they made something great. And Grant, you mentioned it, but you know, he spends 2,000 British pounds of his own money for a couple nights of recording space. This is recorded over 36 hours, September, October 1968. And he produces it himself as well. Yeah. He's got all these ideas in his head, and he says, "Hey, we're gonna go record this own album just with what we've got. Yeah. And I'm gonna produce it, and I'm gonna have a friend engineer it." And I mean, it turns out being like one of the most influential records of all time.
And I think something important to note, not about the recording itself, but the release, is the label color change for for the record collectors. I mean,
for sure.
If you don't know what we're talking about, the label itself, what color was it when it was pressed originally?
Had turquoise
lettering
on the
and then after how many pressings was that, like 1,500 or something that
there's only a couple
that were released with the turquoise lettering, and then it became what was it?
The orange.
Yeah. And so pretty wild, such a huge collector's item.
Oh yeah.
Whether you're a record collector, a Zeppelin fan, just an all around audiophile, whatever it is, just such a crazy,
for sure,
kind of by happenstance. Also, it's not one of those like, it's not what is a limited release in modern day.
Right.
It just happened that way.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important to note at the same time.
For sure, this is one of those albums. I know we were talking about it earlier, but it's 1969. Just think you're a 14 or 16-year-old in London, or maybe even like rural Britain or the US. You've been saving up your money. You love music. You've kind of like heard these rock and roll tones. You go down to the record store one day.
Probably a Beatles fan at that point.
For sure. Yeah. You go down to the record store, maybe a Hendrix follower fan. You go down to the record store and the guy tells you, "Hey man, there's this really great band. It's kind of Yardbirds 2.0. Their guitarist has kind of done this new thing." And you see this crazy black and white negative portrait of a burning balloon.
Of the Hindenburg.
Yeah. Right. And I'll try it out. And you take it home and you put the needle down, and it just slaps you in the face. I don't think your life is the same from there on out, honestly.
No.
Like if you try, I sit here and try to separate myself from the context of streaming and YouTube and just quick music, quick singles, radio, whatever. And I just listen to this album, just 44 minutes of good rock and roll. Music.
You bought the album. You're listening. Right. You're gonna listen to all 9 tracks
for sure. Yeah,
it's not. Yeah. And what I love about it too is because it's their debut album and it's titled Led Zeppelin. There's no title track.
Right.
Yeah. Like I was listening to Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Right.
Yeah. First track is Bridge Over Troubled Water. You could easily listen to the first track and be like, well, I've heard it.
Yeah.
But this one, like, you're not like, oh, Led Zeppelin is track 1 or track
Yeah,
5 or anything.
sure.
You know, it's
Yeah.
I bought Led Zeppelin. I'm listening to the album.
Austin and I listened through this record last week, and we said that a lot of the psychedelic or bluesy rock and roll music from the 60s and 70s was kind of this image of a lava lamp that was floating around that was like wildly colorful and fluid and everything. But I feel like this kickoff to Led Zeppelin's career feels a lot more like a big old black witch's brew sitting in a cauldron.
That they're
Honestly,
smashing lava lamps into.
honestly, yeah. I mean, there's this mixture of folk and blues
Mhm.
and heavy downstroke rock and roll music. You know, there's so much going on, and somehow it just pulls off in this beautiful master. I don't want to say masterpiece yet, but it's a record that, I mean, again, like it influences so much, and
Right.
like I think it like still stands up today, like musically and just like in the sheer energy of it. I think in terms of the whole idea of like sex, drugs, rock and roll, this album, maybe more than any, is the most sex, drugs, and rock and roll of any album that's like ever been released, especially
Yeah.
as a
Th-
first release.
They were not subtle about it.
No.
At all.
No, yeah,
At all,
no
yeah.
subtlety.
You have Robert Plant up there, you know, with his shirt flying open, tight pants, just yelling into a microphone. We were mentioning it, but I think without Robert Plant yelling into a mic and Jimmy Page just shredding on a guitar, there's so much music that doesn't get made. And
Oh,
you know, like
absolutely.
it's insane. It's so insane.
And what's funny about it too is like so much of it is just the back and forth between Plant
Yeah.
and Page.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not even, you know, it's not a riff, it's not even chords, you know, it's just mimicking, you know,
Right.
you just hear them
Yeah.
mimic each other
Yeah.
and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's good music," but I didn't think of it. You know, I didn't
Right.
think
Yeah.
to do it.
For sure. And one thing that's crazy is you look back to the 60s, this album didn't actually get a ton of critical traction early on.
Yeah, no acclaim.
Yeah, no, people were hating on it. Rolling Stone hated it.
Horrible review.
Yeah.
Through Rolling Stone.
There's like a notoriously bad, like Rolling Stone still hates on themselves for how bad they reviewed this
Yeah.
first record.
Yeah. They re-reviewed it,
Right.
correct? Like
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
Well, it's number
for the-
30 on their top 500, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So we're seeing like this album.
Perfect.
So they gave it a terrible review originally, and they came back and labeled it, you know, top 30 on their own.
That's like poor continuity in a
Yeah.
film. You
Yeah,
know?
sure. Yeah, honestly.
Hey, we hate this album 30
Yeah.
years later. Oh yeah, this is like one of the most influential albums of all time.
And one last thing I'll kind of say in terms of the context or historic makeup of this album, and this is one thing I kind of found out going back to this record, is that everybody at this time was sharing music. You know, if you look back at the credits, the songwriting credits of this record, it's like most of these songs are like appropriated from old blues artists, or you know, like there's a Joan Baez influence track on here. There's like all these old folk influence songs, other things, and I think it's pretty. If we think about music historically, I mean that's like how music has been passed down historically. It's just like, hey, you know, this community sang this song, and so we sing this song, we perform this song. And so there's an element of that really exists in this record. And this is 1969. You know,
Yeah.
Woodstock's this year. People are covering each other's stuff. Everybody's doing Bob Dylan songs and Grateful Dead songs.
Yeah.
And, you know, like there's so much collaboration. It's really beautiful, but
This is about the same time that starts to end, though,
for
which
sure.
is, I think, interesting.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. And it's also worth mentioning, like this whole kind of like heavier rock movement kind of is at the height of the Vietnam War, you know?
Yeah.
And so we see 1968 is the highest casualties, you know, in the Vietnam conflict. So we have all these American and Vietnamese people that are dying. And there's so much divisiveness that's going on in the United States and I mean across the globe. And it's kind of really sweet how we see the music community banding together
To
you
drop bombs of their own.
yeah, honestly, like, I just think it's really beautiful. And so they're sharing all this music, and we could have the conversation of, hey, is this appropriation or is this honoring or an homage or maybe a little bit of both? But that's definitely one thing when I look back at this record, I see so much kind of Led Zeppelin borrowing from,
Quote unquote.
yeah, borrowing quote unquote from other records. So it's interesting, but I think it is worth shouting out artists like Howlin' Wolf and other artists who are like really influential to Jimmy Page. And it's interesting because I feel like we talk about cultural appropriation, especially with Black artists. We typically think of American artists that appropriated black music and
Mhm.
kind of made it popular or capitalized
Shout
on
out Elvis.
Elvis Presley. But we often don't really mention the blues rock movement of Britain, you know. So
Yeah.
it's like an interesting thought, and
Because they were
they're
doing a lot.
exactly, yeah,
Even the Beatles the year before had the track Your Blues on it, which
Yeah.
is
for sure,
very much a Beatles song, but there's some heavy blues influence on it.
exactly, yeah, exactly. And so, anyway, let's really quickly let's run through track by track, just some like quick just responses. So, yeah, on this 44-minute runtime record, yeah, starting off, Good Times, Bad Times, absolutely incredible. I know we mentioned
Yeah.
it, but no, I mean, I cannot think of a better way to kick off a musical career than with
Seriously.
this recording. It's absolutely insane.
No.
Bonham on that kick.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, honestly.
Well, and
Incredible
it's
playing.
it's such a good like. It reminds me of some of the live introductions
Yeah.
I've heard at shows, like where one artist will play and then another will pick up, and then the full band will be in.
For sure.
Because
Yeah.
it starts off with Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones just going hard. John Bonham picks up, comes in.
Yeah.
Robert Plant just starts screaming when they all start going for it. And it's like the perfect way to say, okay, this is who we are and we're here. Start paying attention.
For sure. And for the next 40 minutes, they just don't
Yep.
let up. You know, it's incredibly dynamic. So it's Good Times, Bad Times. Which
Also,
is, yeah,
I do want to say about Good
Yeah.
Times, Bad Times, because of how many, you know, unoriginal songs
For
are
sure.
on this album. Kudos to them for kicking it off with an
Yeah.
original.
yeah, it's
Something
great.
nobody's ever heard before.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like, oh, I know the lyrics, but I don't know the
For sure.
the music to it, or
Right.
oh, I know the
Yeah.
music, but I don't know the lyrics. Totally original.
Yeah.
I dig that.
And one thing, this is like a detail, but
Yeah.
they don't just go hard for 3.5 minutes. Like they're very controlled. They have a lot of breaks and
Right.
silence in this song.
Right. It's
Which is
very
crazy.
It's very dynamic, but not just like loud and soft. It's
Yeah.
it's rehearsed, it's tight, it's really great. I
Yeah.
agree with you. Yeah. For sure. And then it slows down into Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You,
Mm-hmm.
which I think you could argue this is one of the most, folk influenced tracks on the record. And there's some stuff on the B side, but on this A side especially, this is kind of really, even the songwriting credits, it's Page, Robert Plant, and then Anne Breeden, who's like a classical, like folk artist in Britain.
Yeah.
And apparently the story goes is that Jimmy Page heard Joan Baez perform this song live, and in his mind he said, "All right, yeah, my band needs to do that," which is
Yeah.
just a really funny idea because I until going back to this record, I didn't ever think of Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, or any of the Led Zeppelin boys like going and listening to some quiet folk artist. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it kind of speaks back to that collaboration piece. But yeah, did y'all have any thoughts on this track? It's really great. I love it a lot.
I think it's pretty brilliant that this is the second track.
Yeah.
Because they start out big and loud,
Mm-hmm.
show off everybody's virtuosity, and then they come down to this, which is no less skilled to play,
Yeah.
Right.
but it's softer, it's warmer. Like Robert
Mhm.
Plant gets to actually sing a little bit more
For sure.
rather than just scream.
Then just scream into it. Yeah.
And Jimmy Page gets to prove that he can make an acoustic rock just as much as an electric.
Definitely. Yeah. I think this is one thing we'll kind of camp out on for a while, but this record is Jimmy Page just flexing his guitar virtuosity on the entire music community. I don't know if he had a chip on his shoulder in response to the Yardbirds kind of failing, or if he was trying to just flex on Jeff Beck or whatever was going on. But I mean, honestly, like there's such a dynamic range of him. I mean, shredding solos with a violin bow, but like also like picking these like beautifully quiet and dynamic, acoustic
Mhm.
tracks, which is really sweet.
Something that I picked out was the guitar in the middle of the song just kind of makes a space sound, right? It reminded me so much of Boston.
Oh yeah.
And I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I mean, shameless, grew up listening to Rush, every Rush album, every Boston album.
Yeah,
So I know those forwards and backwards.
for sure. Yeah.
And so I was like, man, Tom Schultz like really probably obviously grew up listening to Zeppelin, no
Right.
doubt, but there definitely was some influence there. So cool
for sure.
to retrofit that, and really see where that went in the future as well.
That's great. There's this quote from Jimmy Page where he's talking about all the layers and ambiance he had kind of in his mind.
Yeah.
That and it's just like, again, we talk about the influence of this, but it's just wild to think about how much he kind of produced all these textures that ultimately influence like so many other artists. So after Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, presented You Shook Me, which is like not even any of the Led Zeppelin members credited. It's J.B. Lenore and Willie Dixon get the songwriting credits on this. But this is like 6.5 minutes of just blues. Yeah, straight up. Yeah. And I think this is like the track where we can kind of ask that question of, hey, is this appropriated, or is this like an homage to Black blues artists in America, or is this maybe a mixture of both, or I don't know. But I mean, the track is incredible. Like, it's really, really, really
the
great.
The keys solo.
Oh, it's so great. Yeah, it's so great. Yeah.
One thing about this is what they did a lot on this record was they arguably appropriated the bones of the original blues tracks, but then they put a Led Zeppelin skin over the top of it.
For sure. Yeah.
And so, like, when I was listening through this one earlier today, like, it sounds like a blues track except for Jimmy Page's guitar. Like, he's got different effects, different tone on it.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like what you'd hear on any other blues record.
And I think one of the most important pieces of this collaborative era of the 60s was every artist that was doing a good job of performing other artists' music, they were doing it, but also making it their own. Like, I think that's even still when we see somebody on a show or we talk about an artist who's like well covered something, it's like, yeah, we always celebrate. Oh, they made it. They covered this song, but they made it their own. And it's funny if you go back and look at the genre, or as Alex Trebek would say, genre of this album on Wikipedia or other places, one of the things it'll list or subgenres it'll list is blues rock. You know? So yeah, definitely a big part of, I think, Led Zeppelin's identity as a band, and so this is a big piece of that. And again, the song credits Willie Dixon and J.B. Lenore, not even any of the band members. So, Grant, did you have any thoughts on You Shook Me?
Yeah, super bluesy. Love the bars, the harmonica and keys solo, just kill it.
So great. And then side one ends with Dazed and Confused.
Incredible.
Which, oh my gosh.
The transition between You Shook Me and Dazed and Confused is so stark.
It's
incredible.
So good. That's one thing we'll get into, but there are some transitions on this record that, oh my goodness, they're just so great. I think the transitions in and of themselves like really make this record as a whole worth going back and just experiencing beginning to end.
Yeah.
And I think the beginning of this side of the record, Dazed and Confused ending 6.5 minutes, Jimmy Page has kind of compiled this track from all these influences and really like own this psychedelic blues mixture in this witch's brew. It's really, really, really sweet. Grant, what you have initial thoughts on Dazed and Confused?
Just hearing the tempo changes in the song is so fun.
So great. Yeah. Yeah, it's so great. So great. Some of the unsung heroes of this album are Bonham and John Paul Jones.
Jones.
And this record, they've already been shining through, but this track specifically, they're really holding it down and allowing Plant and Page just to shine.
Yeah.
It's really great. Yeah, side two, starting with Your Time Is Gonna Come. Page and Jones get the credit, 4.5 minutes. Pretty solid track.
My personal favorite, actually. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think it's the best or just your personal favorite?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely
sure.
my personal favorite.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that comes from hearing a cover in a medley as a kid.
Oh yeah.
And
for sure.
Like loving that medley and just enjoying Led Zeppelin through the cover. And then
I'll be honest, I think of all the tracks on this record, everyone's great. I think this is the most filler in my head.
Really?
None of them are filler, but what are your thoughts on Your Time Is Gonna Come?
Well, on that one specifically, I love the way that it's got that great organ intro, right?
Oh, yeah.
But then when Jimmy Page hops in, the organ and the guitar are like dancing around each other, and then they return to one another for the end of each bar.
Yeah.
On that little riff.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
And it's just so good how well they handle that. And then you just have John Paul Jones and John Bonham holding it down the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's a really common thread of call and response on this record.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Yeah.
Between Plant and Page's lead, which I think it's so sultry and smooth. I love it. After the organ tones of Your Time Is Gonna Come, Black Mountainside, instrumental. I know I just said that Your Time Is Gonna Come was pretty filler, but you could argue that this is way more filler. But I think this is the most. I think Black Mountainside is the most unique
I think
track on the record. It has to be, right?
I love that it's instrumental.
Yeah.
I love.
Yeah.
I've always thought an instrumental track on an album is pretty refreshing.
For sure.
I think Black Mountainside is so well done.
I agree.
Yeah.
I love the transition into this one too. What were you gonna say, Austin?
See, I think this is probably the most out of place on this record.
I
Okay.
would second
Not that it doesn't belong there.
I agree.
Not
agree.
that I don't like it there.
I see that.
But it's like, okay, we're clearly doing something different right
for
now.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And there's a little bit of the Beatles Within You Without You
Yeah.
Mhm.
on
I
here
hear that.
too.
Yeah. Leading into 2.5 minutes of communication breakdown. Oh my goodness.
Wonderful.
Yeah. It can do no wrong.
Honestly, it can do no wrong. I agree.
Everybody shows off on this track.
Definitely.
Yep.
Everyone
Yeah.
has
Yep.
that moment.
And then on to I Can't Quit You, Baby, another blues track.
This is probably the most directly blues ripoff
Yeah, I agree.
on here.
Yeah, rip off, appropriated, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. There's part of me that wants to just say Led Zeppelin was taking this music that they loved and introducing it to a broader context, which I think it can be great. But there's also
Right.
this reality of Jimmy Page like laying down these blues bars is pretty, I don't know. But I mean, at the same time, it's like they've credited Dixon on the record and he's
Right.
getting songwriting credit. And
I think it feels extra weird for us
Yeah,
today
for sure,
just because we're much more aware of it.
I agree.
But I think an argument you could make is that maybe it's not so much these artists' fault that the like black artists didn't get noticed for what they were doing
Right.
as much as just society who kind of ignored them until Led Zeppelin
Yeah.
showed up doing it, and then they were like, "Oh, we're gonna buy this now."
I agree. And then the last track of the record is How Many More Times? Just 8.5 minutes of
Pure
Wow.
Zeppelin
Yeah.
goodness.
pure rock and roll music.
Still pretty bluesy though.
Definitely.
They didn't close out on their most original one.
Right. Well, and one thing that sticks out to me about the second side of this album is that I know I kind of argued that Your Time Was Gonna Come as a little filler, but I feel like most records of the 70s and 80s, it kind of gets like, hey, let's put our strongest stuff at the front half, and then the
Yeah.
second half will just
Yeah.
kind of be weak. But this whole thing, be front to back, is really great.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really great, and it wraps up well. 8.5 minutes. It's really well done. Any other like closing thoughts on just the track listing or kind of intro or historic context of this album?
I was just gonna say, just for fun, How Many More Times is also in that medley that I fell
Hmm.
in love with.
Oh yeah,
So another one of my faves.
That's
easily,
I could see
easily,
it playing well with Your Time's Gonna Come.
Yeah.
yeah. All right, well that leads us to our categories. So as you guys know, each week we like to look at the album through these different prisms or lenses and kind of talk about the record from different contexts. And so, what do y'all think the best track on Led Zeppelin 1 is?
I have a constant internal battle in my head.
Yeah.
Between Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You and Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
But I think they both have similar things, that they're songs that take you through mountains and valleys about 3 or 4 times before it's over. I think Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You wins out a little bit because I
Really?
love
Yeah.
the acoustic work. Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, Dazed and Confused is a groovy jam, but I just love the acoustic.
I respect that. Grant, what's your best track on the record?
I think I am sticking with Your Time Is Gonna Come. I mean, it just
Your favorite and the best.
favorite and the
Yeah.
best. It's very clean. It's an original track.
Yeah,
I just dig it.
that's great.
I dig
Yeah.
it.
I think the best track on this record has to be Dazed and Confused. I think it has to be. I think you think of 1969, Quentin Tarantino's Brad Pitt driving around. I think this track is the most lasting. If you go back and look at like live recordings,
Yeah.
it's really sweet. There's a recording on the BBC sessions in March of this year where the live recording of Dazed and Confused is like 5 or 6 minutes long.
Yeah.
And then the October version of the BBC Dazed and Confused is like 10 or 11 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you go to the 2003 Led Zeppelin live release from like just their like Jimmy Page's hand-picked tracks.
Yeah.
And Dazed and Confused is a 22-minute track.
Yeah.
And so if you could just pick it like one track, I think this is the most I think the most like achieving dynamic track from the record, but
I think it's where they really clearly defined who they were going to be.
Yeah.
Also,
I agree.
Because-
John Paul Jones shines on it too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh my gosh.
he's out front. Like you're hearing you're hearing him the entire song.
Yeah,
Yeah. And he keeps it so steady.
Yeah,
Which
for
if he
sure.
didn't, it
Incredible.
wouldn't work at all.
for sure. It's so dang good, man.
Well, and they kind of do this on a lot of their tracks on this record, but that's one of the first ones where you clearly hear them guitar, bass, drum all doing the same thing at the same time,
right.
Yep.
which is what made Zeppelin so gut busting.
Well, and again, like the dynamics of like
Mhm.
high and low and just stopping, starting.
Yeah.
It's so great.
You get a little bit of the Jimmy Page, Robert Plant call and response in here.
Oh yeah, for sure. I love it a lot.
So did we all just
Well, I think
say
it's-
that
no,
was
no, no,
our
I think
that was the best track?
I think it's worth saying, like the fact that we all have a different track about this record speaks to how holistically great it is. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
there's so many elements in this record that could have just produced like a mess of an album, but they all produce this beautiful synergy where there's all these genres coming together. I heard this quote. I don't know if it's a Rick Rubin original quote, but he was talking and he was saying that the best music seeks to kind of trample the idea of different genres. You know, it's
Yeah.
like blend. You know, like
Mhm.
the best production and records kind of almost exist without genre. And I think like in the historic context, obviously we look back, oh yeah, that's like classic rock. But I think at the time, there's so many different things that are coming in, and one Led Zeppelin sound that's coming out.
Yeah.
It's just so beautifully done.
And I think to that point, that's
Yeah.
pretty true of how we listen to music as well.
Mhm.
At least the three of us, I know, like we listen to anything and everything.
Right.
You know, there's no, oh, I'm just a classic rock listener. You know, that's all I listen to. It really leads to appreciation for the music when you realize they've pulled from so many different genres and artists.
So what kind of on that vein, next category, what's the best musical moment on this record? Best like little snippet you guys would argue is kind of the Hall of Fame of Led Zeppelin 1.
I've got a couple.
I've got
Two
a
of them
couple
are-
nominations for sure.
Two of them are very small.
Okay.
The first is at about 1:35 on Good Times, Bad Times. There's a moment where Jimmy Page is shredding on a solo. He slides on the guitar, and the guitar slides from left channel to right channel as he does it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Very minor detail, but it's so
for
good.
sure. Well, that reminds me that this was one of the first records that was released only in stereo too.
Yeah.
So there's this movement and experimentation from mono to stereo, and I think they leveraged that well. You know,
Yeah.
Jimmy Page was like, I'm gonna do what I want with this. You know.
Yeah. 502 on Dazed and Confused. All four of them are doing their own thing, and then they just immediately return to the main
Yep.
riff.
Yeah.
Yep. Solid.
And it's so clean, and it's so good.
It's so great. Grant, what are your nominees? You have any nominees for best musical moment?
Yeah, I think Bonham on Good Times, Bad Times.
Yeah.
Just on the kick, just incredible throughout. You know,
Thunderous.
yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And it's amazing at the same.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just the like
Right.
just the noise of it or the sound of it. It's the dynamics of it. You know, the physics of the entire thing. Of like, I couldn't do that. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, it's almost impossible to even picture his feet physically doing that.
right.
For sure. I love the transition in the Dazed and Confused. Which is also it's just John Paul Jones, just the bass intro
Mm-hmm.
is so again, you kind of like start to see like how actually talented Bonham and John Paul Jones are.
Yeah.
Like, you like are unknowingly picking up on it, but
Right.
it's just so great. And even I know we kind of said y'all were arguing it's out of place, but Black Mountainside into Communication Breakdown is really great to me as well.
Yeah.
I love that a lot. And then this is multiple, but all of the violin bow solos that Jimmy Page is doing, it's a little indulging, but I love it so much. I think it's so great. It's just again, Jimmy Page is just flexing like wherever he wants to.
Yeah.
It's his record. You know, it's his record. It's great. Any other like nominees for best musical moment?
We already kind of mentioned it, but like on You Shook Me, that's kind of the first time that we hear Robert Plant doing something like some weird vocalization.
Right.
And then Jimmy Page, you can hear him like change from whatever he's doing to mimic what Robert Plant's doing.
Right.
And they kind of go back and forth on that. And it's
really luscious.
Yes.
Yes, it's great. Yeah. I know we mentioned it, but I think we could talk a long time about influences and legacy of this record. Just quick fire, who are some artists you kind of see just their fingerprints on this first Led Zeppelin record? Like you think influenced I mean, the Yardbirds is a little on the nose, but maybe like other 50s, 60s musicians, rock and rollers, blues artists that kind of thumbprint this record.
Howlin' Wolf,
Yeah,
Yardbirds, you mentioned. Jake Holmes, Muddy Waters, Joan Baez, Bert Jansch. Don't know.
great guy.
Oh yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Probably the Beatles, though a lot
For
more
sure.
subtle. They were
Yeah.
probably actively trying not to sound like them.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I mean, you can't talk about anything in rock and roll without mentioning Robert Johnson
Definitely.
being the first blues artist that actually had recordings.
For sure.
I mean, everyone goes back to him.
You know, Austin, you and I had the trip to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame,
Mm-hmm.
and there was this. I mean, they did a really great job at honoring these black artists that, you know, for a long time I think had gone forgotten.
Yeah.
And just like the context and foundation of rock and roll, but we see artists like Howlin' Wolf that just means so much to a band like Led Zeppelin. And we, you know, we can call this album or record like a bridge between folk and blues to the new like heavier sounds of the 70s and 80s, but you have to have both sides of that bridge. You know, it's like without Howlin' Wolf, without the blues guitars of the Mississippi Delta and all these other like artists that are genuinely singing out of like struggle and suffering, it's like we don't have the sounds of today. You know, I
Yeah.
just think it's like so vital. But Grant, did you have any artists you thought just like had profoundly influenced this record?
Honestly, more subtly
Yeah.
influenced it, that I just kind of felt like I felt a connection between like this album and some Jethro Tull, and I
Yeah.
mean they formed around the same time, so definitely not like deep influences, but just really, I mean, I felt like the intro and Your Time Is Gonna Come,
For sure.
felt Jethro Tull easily could have written and recorded that, and
Yeah.
it sounded very similar. The rest of the song obviously, went into Led Zeppelin's own vein, but
I can
that
see
was-
a little Pink Floyd here, not
Mm.
from compositional standpoint, but in terms of the organizational album experimentation,
Experimental,
track to
for
track,
sure.
track to track type feel. I think that they definitely had a profound influence on them. You know.
Yeah.
And then we see Led Zeppelin's album that goes on to influence so much more. I think we see fingerprints of this record kind of all over the place. This is a year before.
Everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, this is a year before. A lot of people say this is kind of one of the first instances of heavy metal music. They say that, you know, communication breakdown, specifically the
Yeah.
downstrokes, like,
yeah,
you know, without that track, we don't have Black Sabbath's first record coming out next year. Like the following year in Britain, we don't have artists like Metallica. Even so, like I think metal is like heavily influenced by this. We see punk rock that's heavily influenced by this.
yep,
Joey Ramone quoted communication breakdown as like one of his main influences. He would sit around and try to like learn how to downstroke that fast, like playing guitar, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really sweet. But did y'all like acknowledged or highlighted any other like big artists or tracks or things that you knew had direct fingerprints from this first Led Zeppelin record?
I don't know about direct as much.
Yeah.
But as I was trying to just think of like the heavier rocking things, even from the last 20, 25 years, I mean, when I listen to some Pearl Jam or White Stripes or even some of Bowie's wilder 90s stuff, like you could hear some of the same tricks going on.
For sure.
The guitar and bass playing the same thing together, playing in rhythm with the drums. Like that's a big thing that I think has carried through.
I agree. Great. I know you and I are big Metallica fans. I feel like, you know, without this 1969 release, there's probably not freedom to yell into a microphone. You know, like
Yeah.
even just the reality of that.
Yeah.
There's like so much there. I do want to acknowledge Good Times, Bad Times was used in a ton of movies.
Yep.
Like Louis C.K. used it for a stand-up special. It's in American Hustle and The Fighter. Apparently Christian Bale just loves to get some Good Times, Bad Times, pumping them up before some big scenes. I remember the 1999 movie Small Soldiers with the little soldiers that come to life, and it was one of the.
Oh,
Do you remember that
is
movie?
it little?
Small Soldiers. Remember that?
Yeah, I didn't think that's what it was.
No, you
called,
don't
though.
remember it. It's fine. But Communication Breakdown was in that
I remember it. I didn't
movie.
think that's what it was
But
called.
there's also, it's for another album, but there's some funny stories of people like Jack Black, like reaching out to Led Zeppelin to, get some just permission to use, get some royalty permissions there. It's really sweet.
But that was a funny conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So big question. Next category. Do you guys think that this is Led Zeppelin's best album?
No.
No.
Quick nose. Okay, but you could one could argue that without this record, then nothing else ever comes. So
I don't think that means anything.
Right.
I think that's a lame argument always.
yeah, you're not wrong.
Is this the best album? No. Is it necessary for the rest of
guys, I was just trying
their
to play
catalog?
devil's advocate, dude.
No, we get it.
Yeah. I was just
Dude.
I wrote down no. I said no. It's not. I mean, this is like
Then why didn't you just say that?
it's the bottom of the
got a
mountain.
point.
They've got so much more to climb. I will say this record is so beautiful and so great and needed for the rest of Led Zeppelin's career to thrive.
Yeah.
So
I think it's in
Absolutely.
the
yeah,
top half of their career.
Yeah.
For sure.
For sure.
I received that. Who do you think is the MVP of this record? Most valuable player?
I'm going to be lame and obvious and say Jimmy Page.
Yeah,
I saw
Grant.
that coming.
Grant, who do you think MVP of the record?
John Paul Jones.
John Paul
JPJ.
Jones.
Yeah.
Yo, laying it down.
Yeah.
What's your argument point there?
I just think the way he keeps up, I love him being out front on Dazed and Confused. I don't know. I'm a sucker for the bass though.
Yeah. I have to agree with Austin. This is Jimmy Page's record. Just straight up.
It helps that he produced it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
no Jimmy Page, no record.
for sure. Well, he's like organized all this stuff. He's producing it. He's definitely featuring it and centering it to make himself look good. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of the dynamics don't exist without his acoustic to shredding to blues to folk to
Yeah.
there's just
Yeah.
so much going on.
I would say no Jimmy Page, no record. No John Paul Jones, worst record.
Yeah. I mean,
Like
yeah.
different
you
bass,
take
different bass
anyone
player.
out, it doesn't work.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think Bonham and JPJ they're the unsung heroes. Of this record.
There's nobody that you could replace
I agree.
with another artist of the same instrument and go,
Right.
they would make this album.
Jimmy
better.
Page is
Right.
Michael Jordan, but JPJ is Scottie Pippen.
Yeah.
Just setting him up. He's the primary assist artist there.
I don't know, but I'm just going to agree.
Amen.
Sounds
That's
good.
great. Just nod, smile, and wave.
What
boys.
are sports?
The Huey Lewis record?
Oh, perfect.
So just personal taste question. Do you guys consider this like a desert island record for you,
Personally, no.
Austin?
I think I tried to take it with me and I lost it in the surf
That's great.
in favor of something else.
I think no. I do think there's a Led Zeppelin album probably
Yeah.
on a desert island with me,
Mm.
but I don't think it's this record.
Do you want to say what that would be for you?
I think it's kind of cliche. I would have to probably say 4.
Same.
It's just so great. Okay, next category. Of the tracks on this record, which would get featured in Forrest Gump, the 1994 epic film starring Tom Hanks? I think it's Good Times, Bad Times. And it's like right when the storm clears up and the fighting starts in Vietnam. Or maybe Dazed and Confused could fit in somewhere in that
Mm.
record, just in terms of like the 60s, 70s hippie stuff that's going on with Jimmy
I was
whatever.
thinking
Yeah.
Dazed and Confused or Communication Breakdown.
Yeah.
Same part of the movie, right when Forrest and Bubba in the middle of the rain, leaning back to back.
I also see maybe Your Time Is Gonna Come when Jenny gets on the bus and leaves Forrest for like the third time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the organ makes that happen.
For sure.
Yeah.
So she's like, all right, Forrest, they're in DC. They've like had a good time together. And then she gets back on the bus and it's just the organ and Forrest like walks away sad.
I think Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You sonically fits in well with the rest of the soundtrack,
I agree with that.
but I don't know where it goes in the movie.
That's a great track. So one other segment we love to kind of dive into is 5 Degrees of U2. And so Austin and I specifically are heavily
Mhm.
influenced by the sultry tones of U2. And how can we connect the music of this record to the musical creations of U2?
Would you prefer the long version or the short version? Trick question, they're the same.
They're the same. Give us the breakdown, Austin.
Well, you go from Led Zeppelin to Joey Ramone of the Ramones to
Is that what he was in?
U2.
Joey Ramone was in the Ramones?
I think so.
Huh.
I think Joey Ramone was one of the Ramones. I may be wrong.
No, I think you're correct.
Yes. Clear cut influence there.
Mhm.
Joey Ramone picks up on Communication Breakdown. U2, the Edge specifically quotes Joey Ramone as one of their primary punk influences. And there we have. That's only what, 2 degrees? To
And then
U2?
Bono says it for the Edge.
Exactly. Because the Edge doesn't talk. So yeah, less than 5 degrees.
So
to
2,
U2.
maybe 3 2.5. We'll say 2.5 degrees.
See, we
Sure,
all realize that everyone loves U2, specifically when U2 allowed their album to be put on everyone's iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
we're just
never
leaning
removed.
into that prime tastes that everyone
Yeah.
has and love for the band.
They also had the red phones
Yeah.
before that.
Mhm.
So
For sure. Could you guys think of an alternate track order for this record, or do you think it's perfect?
So I kind of thought of two.
Okay.
I think they either put all of their more original tracks on side A and let it bleed into the blues tracks.
I like that.
Like we were saying earlier, a lot of the older records from that time would have like the heavy hitters up front and then let you give up at a certain point along the way. I mean, I think about specifically George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. There's a point around side C or D where I'm like, all right, I've had all I can take.
Yeah.
Or put those first and let it be a progression
right.
from like their influence on I Can't Quit You Baby, like the most bluesy one, into where they start holding their own,
Yeah.
like being their own band.
Grant, did you have any ideas on could you spice this record up in any way if you change the tracks around?
I mean, I think naturally, Black Mountainside could move around somewhere.
Yeah.
I think it could start the B side. I also think it could end the B side.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it'd be a really cool intro to the second side. You've just flipped the record. You know, you're expecting, I mean, you end with Dazed and Confused. You don't know what, you're expecting something heavier and harder to start the second side. And all of a sudden, Black Mountainside comes on and you're like, wait, an instrumental only track? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, these guys are more versatile than I was expecting. I just thought it was going to be more Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if you end the record with it, it's like this weird way, like curveball.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you're like, okay.
It's almost
Yeah, it doesn't show like a variation in what you
Right.
did. It shows like a boredom.
it's almost
Yeah.
it's almost like it would almost be like a hidden track at that point because
Right. Yeah.
like
It'd be like Her Majesty at the end of Abbey Road.
definitely yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I tried to like move things around. I don't think you can move Good Times Bad Times from the beginning of this record.
No.
No.
Unless there's a world where like communication breakdowns kind of like maybe first, but I just think it's a great record beginning to end. That kind of leads us to a good spot. I mean, the last kind of category is what does this album mean in 2020? Like what do you kind of what do we glean from this record? What can we gather from this Led Zeppelin recording from 51 years ago now? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think there's something about this record that's kind of universal in music. Like anyone can connect with the melodies going on or the rhythms. Like it didn't take a lot of fancy production or anything to get that done. Just skilled musicians who know how music works.
I mean, it is one of the quintessential albums, whether you dig classic rock or not. There's 9 tracks. You probably know 7 of the 9 tracks.
Yeah.
There's
a reason we're talking about this album 50 years later. And I feel like of Led Zeppelin's records, we said that this isn't their best, but I feel like this is their most lightning in a bottle, sheer raw power. The bridge from blues to heavy rock. I just think there's so much that we could learn from that today. I don't think we have indie rock or indie music without somebody like Jimmy Page paying $2,000 out of pocket to record his own.
Yeah.
I don't think we have even the like heavily cleaned up producers today without this effort to sit around in a studio for 36 hours and just record this beautifully rough sounding thing. And things, if you trace Led Zeppelin's career, you can definitely see a line where they're cleaning up and getting things more refined and creative and whatever. But there's something to be said about just the pure rock and roll energy that comes from this. And there's something about that we're talking about 50 years later. And again, I think like my ultimate meaning I kind of gleaned from this is this record and this band's performance in this record is a bridge from blues and folk of the 60s to heavy rock of the 70s and 80s. And I think it's extremely vital for the music sphere today.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that makes it so iconic is that album artwork. Just the
Definitely.
cover.
Yeah.
I mean, you see the cover, you know it. It's Led Zeppelin.
I mean,
So much so that it became a logo of sorts for the band.
and somebody
The
tried
Greatest Hits
to
collection has it on there.
Right.
and somebody tried to make fun of them, and they leaned into it
Right.
and owned it.
Right.
That's one of the most
Rock and
kick-a
roll.
thing. Yeah, rock and roll things. I mean, stories of
Yeah.
ever. You know,
Okay.
and even
if that's what you think, well,
even the fact that like critically they were hated on, but like commercially they sold millions and millions of records, and now it's
Yeah.
regarded as one of the top of all time. And there's like something to be said there. And so
Something really good about a middle finger that you don't even have to put out there.
for sure,
right.
Everyone else
If-
does it for you.
Do you want me to do something well? Tell me I can't.
right?
You know?
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
that's what they did.
Definitely,
Like, tell me I can't do it. Tell me it's gonna fail, and I'll show you.
that's great. And that kind of like wraps up our time here on Post Amp. We're so glad you joined us today. Please, take a minute to follow us on social media. You can find us at Post Amp Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, man, take the chance and follow us on Spotify, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find us at Post Amp Podcast. If you have any feedback or questions, or you have an idea for a record we should review, please take the time to email us at postampodcast@gmail.com. Also, we can be reached and commented and talked to on any of our social media outlets. So, thanks again for your time. We look forward to connecting with you next week. We're going to be reviewing Coat of Many Colors by Dolly Parton. So, take a chance to listen to that record, the full 27 minutes of that 1971 beautiful masterpiece from old Dolly. And we look forward to hearing from you next week. All right. See you later.